And good afternoon. Welcome to our weekly webinar in this Poetry Month on an absolutely beautiful day in Pittsburgh. It's warm, the sky is clear, there's no wind worth talking about, the birds are fluttering around. Out in my backyard, the groundhog has made his first appearance of the year. There are rabbits, there are squirrels. But it's absolutely beautiful out there. And the good news is it will be on Sunday. But tomorrow, of course, it will rain. Anyway, at least for now, the snow has gone. And let us hope as we progress through April that it stays gone. But this is Pittsburgh, so anything is possible. So as I say, this week we're going to be talking about the art of poetry. But we're going to also be listening to some poetry as well, because I do think that the best way to talk about poetry is to listen to poetry, to read poetry. And poetry is one of those words that has been, it sort of has that same cachet as the word drama. Everybody thinks it's something that's, intellectual and heavyweight and boring, whereas in fact it's just a word to describe a particular way of communicating. Anyway, more about that in a minute. First of all, I want to say my thank yous. I want to say hello and welcome to everybody out there and to all of those who are watching on YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can watch it anyway, but if you subscribe, it makes everything better for us. And everything is there on the YouTube and indeed on the website. So go into the website, which we have updated. It's now all new, all fresh, all beautiful. And you can get links to everything, including how to book tickets for our next production, which is coming up in a month's time, which is Endgame. There it goes. Starting on May 12th at QED, and with 4 of your favorite picked actors, with Martin Giles, James Fitzgerald, Karen Baum, and with Ken Bolden. So that's going to be wonderful, and I do hope you look at that. There you are. There's the ad for it, and 4 splendid picked actors. I'm looking so forward to this. It's going to be quite wonderful. So I also want to say our usual thank you to, there you are, tickets and information at pittheatre.org. And I want to say our usual thanks to the Allegheny Foundation, because, as you know, they sponsor us for the year. They sponsor the entire year of our webinars. It's a very generous sponsorship. It does cover the cost of producing them. There is a cost to everything. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And there's certainly no such thing as a free webinar. We have to pay for the platform and everything else. But just because it's sponsored doesn't mean we aren't still seeking your support. And if you want to make a donation, you can do that at the website. The donations really matter. I keep saying it. It is the donations that put the plays on the stage. The various grants and other things we get help cover our education programs and our administration and various other things. But it's your donations that put the plays on the stage. So without them, without no donations, no plays. It's as simple as that. So we do need your help. We have a big spring appeal going on at the moment. We have a fundraising challenge on that appeal. We need to raise $50,000. We would like you to be a contributor to that. No matter how small, whether it's $5, $10, $20, no matter how small, it all helps. Of course, if you can manage it, we prefer more. So if you can manage the 250 or 500 even, it really does help. But don't think your donation doesn't help. It really does. Hello there, David from sunny Stratford-upon-Avon. You see, sunny there, sunny here. Anyway, don't imagine for a moment that a few dollars of a donation won't help. It really does. A lot of people sending us a little money really does help. I'm sorry to go on about it, but that's the way it is. Without the funding, we can't do the plays. So please, please, please do consider. At the end of today, during today, at any point over the weekend, go to the website, send us some money. It really does matter, and thank you. So it's 2:00. We'll wait for the usual minute for the latecomers and people still parking. And I don't know why I say that. I don't know why I say that. I mean, I assume that people who are watching the webinar are already out of their cars and sitting in front of their computers, but you never know. So, always, as we say, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. We'll try to answer them live. If not, if you've got a big question, needs a complex answer, send us an email. We'll see what we can do. We are here to serve. PICT is your theatre company. All inquiries, there you are, marketing@picttheatre.org. And that particular email address is checked constantly, all day, every day, even on Sundays. So if you have any questions, please feel free. Okay, enough chit-chat. I'm going to, let's make a beginning on it. It is Poetry Month, which I think is a wonderful thing. Dedicating, I mean, we should dedicate 12 months of the year to poetry, but it's very good that we have a month in the year when we just raise awareness of the art of poetry and what it means. So a little bit of academia. The word poem, needless to say, comes from a Greek origin. Anything that's good in theatre or literature or drama or anything, it comes from the Greeks. Poiesis, which is, as far as my research tells me, means making, which I think is interesting. Making, creating. And we use that term poetic as a reference to many things that are, a poetic painting, a poetic view, a poetic attitude, poetic behavior. That is creating something. And I think that's a rather, I love the fact that that's where the derivation comes from. We can be more academic. The Oxford English Dictionary, quoting here, describes a poem to be a piece of writing in which the expression of feeling and ideas is given intensity by particular attention to diction, sometimes involving rhyme, rhythm, and imagery. Yeah. But in fact, dry though that may sound, that really does sum it up. Poetry is a form of what we describe as literature, but it's more than that. It has its origins in just about every culture that evolved over the evolution of humanity. And it evolved, if you like, I like to think of it as a formalization of the art of storytelling. And we've talked a lot about storytelling in the past. And storytelling, traditionally, when we think about it, is about the spoken word, about the telling of a story, the reciting of a story. And the spoken word certainly predates the written word. It was only at some point when we felt a need to communicate without speaking or for posterity that the notion of writing it down in some kind of visible symbol evolved. But the spoken word predated the written word. And we can therefore say that poetry as an art almost certainly predates literacy, or the ability to read, the ability to write. Poetry is older than that. You don't have to be able to read or write to be a poet. Very important point. Now, some of the very earliest examples of poetry you will find in African culture. There are traces and evidence of what have been described as hunting poems. And we can recognize that notion of using rhythmic word structures as a way of bringing a group together, be it tribally. We still do it. I mean, anybody who's ever watched a movie where Marines are training and running up and down, they're always chanting something that rhymes. We use this notion of the format, the formula of a word structure as a kind of rhythmic pulse by which we can operate. Written poetry, earliest examples of that go back about 2,500 years BCE, which for those of you who can't count means about 4,500 years ago from now. They were found in Egypt. There were folk songs in China, Zoroastrian writings, Sanskrit texts. Homer's famous epics from the Greek culture were poems. The Psalms of David that you will read in the Bible poetry. The oldest known love poem I discovered from my extensive research is actually, it was found on a Sumerian terracotta tablet. And it was found on the site of Ur in the Chaldees. And for those of you who know the Old Testament, that's where Abraham came from, Ur in the Chaldees. And that particular tablet is reckoned to be over 4,000 years old. A love poem written by somebody in love 4,000 years ago, and we still have it. And of course, the ancient Greeks. And they developed the concept of the poetics as we now understand them, and as we talked about extensively a few weeks back, developed that entire concept into what we now understand as drama, the notion of performed poetry that became plays, that became the drama as we understand it. It was Aristotle, in his book, The Poetics, who really defined poetry into three genres: the epic poem, the tragic poem, and the comic. Epic, tragic, comic. Pretty much covers everything. We have said before that the root of all theatre is based on the same principles as poetry. Those three principles of the epic, the tragic, and the comic. And it really does sum everything up that can be either poetic or dramatic. Anyway, that's all rather academic. And when it comes to poetry, the academic doesn't really scratch the surface. It tells you a lot of facts. But poetry itself, and any true consideration of poetry, is not objective or academic. It must be subjective. Because for poetry, pretty much with any other art form, and all art forms come from that principle of storytelling, whether you're painting, whether you're sculpting, whether you're writing, it is always attempting in some way, shape, or form to tell a story. So poetry, just like any other art, beauty and meaning is very much in the eye of the beholder. We react to a work of art, we react to a play, we react to a story. We react to it best because we recognize that story or the effects of that story, the meaning or the suggestions of that story. As I say, be it a poem, a play, a book, a painting, a sculpture, we recognize something within ourselves. And we always best recognize when we can see it within ourselves. I like to think of poetry as a distillation of experience, a distillation of a thought, of an idea, of something that has happened to someone, or something that someone has recognized. And where a novel can, I always said about D.H. Lawrence, wonderful novelist, English novelist, but would never use one word when 25 would suffice. But the poet works in a different way. It is that distillation of thought down to as close as the poet can get to a perfect reduction. It's like making a sauce. You put in lots of different things and wine and what have you, and you leave it on the stove until it has reduced and reduced and reduced to a perfect flavor. And that, to me, is the art of the poet. So this week, we're going to look at some poems, just as a pure act of celebration. There's no motif behind it, although I'm interested to discover that I have three guests who have pre-recorded some poems for us, and they're going to tell you they're going to read the poem, going to tell you a bit about the poem, and also a reason why poetry matters to them. So my three best guests are Nancy Bach, Jalina McClarin, and Alex Manalo. And we're going to begin. I think we should just dive into this. We're going to begin with Nancy's choice. Nancy is a playwright and an actor, and like me, has made Pittsburgh her home. And let's have a listen to Nancy.
This is Love and a Question by Robert Frost. A stranger came to the door at eve, and he spoke the bridegroom fair. He bore a green-white stick in his hand, and for all burden, care. He asked with the eyes more than the lips for a shelter for the night, and he turned and looked at the road afar without a window light. The bridegroom came forth into the porch with, "Let us look at the sky and question what of the night to be, stranger, you and I." The woodbine leaves littered the yard. The woodbine berries were blue. Autumn, yes, winter, was in the wind. Stranger, I wish I knew. Within, the bride in the dusk alone bent over the open fire. Her face rose red with the glowing coal and the thought of the heart's desire. The bridegroom looked at the weary road, yet saw but her within, and wished her heart in a case of gold and pinned with a silver pin. The bridegroom thought it little to give a dole of bread, a purse, a heartfelt prayer for the poor of God, or for the rich a curse. But whether or not a man was asked to mar the love of two by harboring woe in the bridal house, the bridegroom wished he knew. I chose this poem, which, on its surface is kind of a trivial poem, but it's kept coming back to me, especially recently, and it comes back to me with some regularity anytime some big terrible thing happens in the world, or even small terrible thing. And I begin to feel too lucky. I mean, I begin to struggle with how does one embrace one's own happiness, one's luck, the good things that one has, one's ease, when there are so many terrible things happening in the world. And this really encapsulates that. It seems like it's just about, a bride and a bridegroom, but really it's about anybody who has, and then how do you square that with the have-nots, and what do you do, and what is required of one? So yeah, I wrestle with it a lot.
What do you draw from the poem? What answers have you found in Robert Frost's work?
I don't think I've gotten answers really to that question. I think I've gotten a sense of comfort that it's not just me having that conversation with myself, and that it is a struggle that we all do have, and that's a human feeling. And I feel some sympathy, I guess, with the bride and the bridegroom, so maybe that gets me off the hook a little bit in this very privileged life that I have, compared certainly to the people who have nothing. What do I love about poetry? It's funny, for much of my life, certainly in my youth, I was terrified of poetry. I was afraid I wouldn't get it, I wouldn't understand it, and what if there were references, and what if I was wrong? And it really took sort of getting over myself in that way, and over being a good student, for me to start to enjoy it. I love the many variations of it. I love all the different sorts of poets and poems, and I love the variety of it, and I love the drama of it. Of course I do. I love the unboundedness. I love the imagery. I love the freedom to embrace the words and the images. And with Robert Frost, especially in his early stuff, it's mostly about nature. So there's mist, and there's woodbine berries, and just all that natural stuff that the words themselves kind of feel like the things, and it cuts right through. Poetry does. It goes straight to the humanness of things, and I love that.
And that's the point. It does go, it cuts through and goes to the heart of the point. I love the poems of Robert Frost, and Robert Frost is a perfect example of two of the elements that were mentioned in that definition of poetry, both rhyme and rhythm. Some of Frost poems do use rhyme as a mechanism, and it is a popular form and a traditional form that poetry will have rhyme within it. But regardless of whether he uses rhyme or not, his sense of rhythm is quite wonderful, because the rhythm of a poem should have to a degree, the capacity, a rhythm that can attract you and pull you in and help you maintain that point of concentration to follow that essential distilled theme. And to my mind, Robert Frost does that wonderfully. Now, my three readers have all chosen relatively modern poets. So being the artistic director of Pitt Classic and Irish Theatre, I am nevertheless, needless to say, I'm going to read classic poems from a much earlier period. And I've chosen as a sort of theme, there are three love poems, if you like. And because love is, I suppose, more poems have been written on the topic of love than just about anything else. It is the ultimate attempt by humanity to distill those thoughts of love into a sequence of words that can express feeling. It is subjective, as I say, poetry is subjective. And my first choice of a poem is by a man called John Dunn, who was, amongst many other things, he was a priest of the Anglican Church, of the Church of England. He wrote long and brilliantly composed sermons. His most famous, I think everybody will know as the Sermon on Death, which, no man is an island entire of itself, and concludes with that very salutary phrase, "Send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Quite a brilliant writer, wonderfully perceptive, but he also wrote some wonderful love poetry. And this one is my particular favorite because I think it expresses perfectly what, when two people love one another, they become that perfect union, that perfect unity. And that when they realize, that moment of realizing that you are not entire until you are together, is so beautifully expressed this. The poem is called The Good Morrow. I wonder, by my troth, what thou and I did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then, but supped on country pleasures childishly? Or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den? 'Twas so. But this all pleasure's fancies be. If ever any beauty I did see, which I desired and got, 'twas but a dream of thee. And now, good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear. For love, all love of other sight controls, and makes one little room, and everywhere. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone, let maps to others, worlds on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world, each hath one, and is one. My face in thine eyes, thine in mine appears, and from true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Where can we find two better hemispheres without sharp north, without declining west? Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike, that none do sicken, none can die. I adore that poem. It is that perfect distillation of the thought that individually, separately, crazy things can happen. But when two people are united, when love unites two people so completely that they become one, there is a safety and a security and a certainty in that. And that beautiful phrase, for love, all love, all love of other sights controls and makes one little room and everywhere. When you are with the person for whom you feel love and who feels that love for you, when you are united in that, one little room becomes everywhere. I think those of us who have experienced love recognize that completely, that when you're in love and with the one you love, you are never isolated. The whole world is there encapsulated. And John Dunn, I think, so perfectly encapsulated that thought in that poem. Now, my next guest is Jalina. And Jalina is also an actor and a poet and an arts administrator, and very clever. And she's going to read a poem by Ross Gay called Buttoning and Unbuttoning My Shirt. Here's Jalina.
My name is Jalina McClarin, and I'm going to be reading Ode to Buttoning and Unbuttoning My Shirt by Ross Gay. No one knew, or at least I didn't know they knew, what the thin discs threaded here on my shirt might give me in terms of joy. This is not something to be taken lightly. The gift of buttoning one shirt slowly, top to bottom, bottom to top, or sometimes the buttons will be on the other side and I am a woman that morning. Slipping the glass through its slot, I tread differently that day, or some of it anyway. My conversations are different, and the car bomb slicing the air and the people in it, and the honeybee's legs furred with pollen mean another thing to me than on the other days, which too have been drizzled in the simplest of joys, in this world of spaceships and subatomic this and that. 2, maybe 3 times a day, some days, I have the distinct pleasure of slowly untethering the one side from the other, which is like unbuckling a stack of vertebrae with delicacy, for I must only use the tips of my fingers, with which I will one day close my mother's eyes. This is as delicate as we can be in this life, practicing like this, giving the raft of our hand to the clumsy spider and blowing soft until she lifts her damp heft and crawls off. We practice like this, pushing the seed into the earth like this, first in the morning, then at night we practice sliding the bones home. The poem, an ode to buttoning and unbuttoning my shirt, it is important to me, and all of Ross Gay's work is important to me because he does an incredible job of weaving joy into grief and sadness, and like showing that they're two sides of the same coin, and showing that what incredible beauty can be had from simple moments, like spiritual joy from something as simple as buttoning and unbuttoning your shirt every day. I, in addition to being an actor, I write poetry, and for me it is like the perfect marriage of the feeling self and the thinking self. I find it's a space that really allows me to be in my body with my emotions, with whatever's going on with me, and express and not over intellectualize, and really be in a more feeling space. And that goes with reading poetry or writing poetry or anything like that.
And there's another point that I think I can't make often enough. And this notion of the poet, what Gay does in that poem, of weaving joy and sadness, happiness and the happy and the tragic, weaving them together to make us realize that they are all part of that one totality of experience, the experience of life. That nothing is ever simple. I've said it so many times. When you see the classic Greek theatre masks of comedy and tragedy, they are always linked together. They're not separate. And a truly great poet will always manage to achieve that, to take that which is comforting and match it with that which is disturbing. And when that is done well, I think in a way poetry in that sense tells us, be afraid, but don't be afraid too long. What was the famous, I think it was Maya Angelou, every storm runs out of rain. That you are always reassured by poetry, if poetry is good, that this is just the human condition. And even that title, Buttoning and Unbuttoning My Shirt, to take that simple image, something we can all grasp. It might sound crazy, but it's a very simple image that everybody does. We all button and unbutton our shirts. We all tie our shoelaces. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. But taking a simple image like that and then weaving from it the complexity of ideas that the poem contains, is quite remarkable. That is the art of the poet, to take a simple image and weave within it that complexity of life in a way that we can recognize it, we can understand it within ourselves. That's the purpose of poetry, and therefore that is the purpose, should be the purpose of all the literate arts, all the arts of novel writing and playwriting and what have you. And just as the painter, when painting, attempts to demonstrate something that the painter sees that they hope you will see and experience. Demonstrating life. And life is not just simple, life is complex. So the poem, the perfect poem, should reduce that complexity, or not reduce, distill that complexity to something that we can immediately recognize and identify with, and hopefully learn from and be comforted by. Because we all learn from literature, we all learn from drama and poetry and what have you. But very often we need to be comforted by it as well, and not comforted as in told fairy tales, but comforted in the fact that everything that has happened before and will continue to happen for as long as our species exists. My next poem, I can't do Poetry Month and read poetry without coming to Shakespeare, can I? I mean, you'd expect me to, wouldn't you? Anyway, Shakespeare wrote some of the most perfect examples of the sonnet. In fact, he wrote an awful lot of them. Some of them are better than others, but all of them are remarkable. And there are so many famous love poems within that spectrum of the Shakespearean sonnets. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and all the rest of it, and let me not to the marriage of true minds. So many superb, wonderful poems on the topic of love. And as I said, love, poets have written more poems about love than just about any other topic, any other subject. And I think it is because it's one of the hardest things to express. I've used the example before, that simple word love, the ultimate four-letter word, love, is that same word we use to describe how we feel about puppies, chocolate, and the person we hope to spend the rest of our lives with. We use exactly the same word. So when you want to express how you truly feel about somebody, as John Dunn did, that without you I am incomplete, is basically what he's saying. But with you I am total. That marriage of true minds that Shakespeare talks of is exactly what John Dunn is talking about. But Shakespeare was cleverer than all that. Shakespeare was cleverer than most people. And one of the great truths about love poetry is there's an awful lot of bad love poetry. Because, especially from young men, a somewhat pejorative statement, but I stand over it. I know in my youth, which was, a year or two ago, I wrote some very bad love poetry that I would be ashamed to admit and have destroyed most of it. Most young people go way over the top when trying to express how they feel. I always have this image in my mind of Shakespeare sitting in the Mermaid Tavern over a tankard of ale, trying to write something intelligent, and surrounded by young poets who are all writing nonsense about the women they love, and reading it to one another, and trying to outdo one another with expressions of the perfection of the women that they love. I use forgive the somewhat masculine tendency there, but the majority of evidence that we have of writing was that it was mostly men. No doubt there were women writing poetry. Sadly, posterity hasn't handed a lot of it down. However, back to my point. All these young poets writing how glorious that the woman they loved was better than anyone. And I just have this image in my head of Shakespeare with a quill and a pot of ink and a blank piece of parchment in front of him, writing down and then reading to them aloud the following poem. Sonnet number 130. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak. Yet well I know that music has a far more pleasing sound. I grant, I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. And to me, that is one of the most remarkable and perfect love poems ever written, because it is about loving the person you love, not the ideal, not the image that you imagine. It is loving the reality. It is true love. It is absolutely true love because it is based completely on reality. And I adore it for that reason. It's one of those, I can probably quote dozens of examples of bits of Shakespeare that are utterly perfect. To my mind, Sonnet 130 is an utterly perfect love poem. Now, my third and final guest of today is Alex. And Alex, she is an actor. In fact, she is a multidisciplinary artist. Actor, dancer, choreographer, all sorts of things. And her poem of choice is First Inspiration by Jose Rizal. Here is Alex.
Hello, my name is Alex Manalo, and this is a reading of First Inspiration, which is a poem by Jose Rizal. Why falls so rich a spray of fragrance from the bowers of the balmy flowers upon this festive day? Why from woods and vales do we hear sweet measures ringing that seem to be the singing of a choir of nightingales? Why in the grass below do birds start at the wind's noises, unleashing their honeyed voices as they hop from bough to bough? Why should the spring that glows its crystalline murmur be tuning to the zephyr's mellow crooning as among the flower it flows? Why seems to me more endearing, more fair than on other days, the dawn's enchanting face among red clouds appearing? The reason, dear mother, is they feast your day of bloom, the rose with its perfume, the bird with its harmonies, and the spring that rings with laughter upon this joyful day with its murmur seems to say, live happily ever after. And from that spring in the grove, now turn to hear the first note, that from my lute I emote to the impulse of my love. I chose this poem, and it's impactful to me because it's written by Jose Rizal, who was a national hero of the Philippines. He's considered to have fought for freedom with his writing. And lately, I've been trying to connect with my heritage and my roots. So I've been learning a lot about various artists from those islands. Also, this poem, First Inspiration, was one of Jose Rizal's first poems, and it was written to and for his mother, which my mother is from the Philippines, so I thought I would pay homage to her and to our country. I love poetry because I think it is so beautiful. Ever since I was a kid, I used to take out Shel Silverstein books from the library and just feed on those poems and how rich the text is in little words. I find that very fascinating. I'm a dancer, so I love telling stories in any aspect or any medium, whether that be with your body or with your words. So I think poem is like movement in just an elegant and very graceful and just wonderful way. Thank you to Pict for letting me share that poem with you, and happy National Poetry Month. Bye.
And bye to you. And there you have it, because here you have somebody who is, she's an actor, but she's also a dancer, expressing exactly that thought. It is that form of storytelling, the poetics of dance, the poetics of literature, the poetics, the poetic. That word keeps coming back. And an expression, as she said, the writer whose writing he chose to express a nationalism, a sense of place, a sense of purpose, a sense of identity. And very often that is the joy of poetry. And coming back to John Donne's phrase, to make one room and everywhere, it is very much in the nature of art that we describe the universal with the particular. Now, I could have chosen a lot of different poems because when I addressed the question, what are my favorite poems, I chose three at random. I could probably choose hundreds. You know, when we talk about, I can think about my youth, and I would have chosen Fern Hill by Dylan Thomas, or I would have chosen Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney. I can think of dozens and dozens of poems that immediately encapsulate moments in my life or memories in my life. I know I've worked in cities all my life and in theatre, but I'm a country boy at heart. I grew up in the countryside, and I love it and I miss it, and one day I'll return to it. But that subjectivity of poem, that it touches oneself. He wrote a poem to his mother. She wanted to read it because that particular thought association carried it through. No, we're not going to, by the way, we won't be going our full length today because I just wanted to deal with this one particular topic. And my final choice, my last poem of the 6 that we're doing today, might be considered a bit of fun, but it's more than that. And I consider it one of the great poems, because it is about that very topic that my other 2 choices have addressed. And when we think of great poetry, you know, we think of like Robert Browning wrote poems of love. They went on for pages and pages. Tennyson wrote poems of love, and they went on for pages and pages. And Shelley and Byron and all the rest of them. The art of 19th century poetry writing was, let's see how many words you can get on the page, how many verses you can get into your poem. And tended to, even though within that there are beautiful poems, beautiful, exquisite poems, and beautiful and exquisite phrases that sum up, as Shakespeare did, the truth of love. There are certain poems that absolutely encapsulate the idea of the romance of love, because romance should never be taken out of the love equation. Romance is part of the joy of love. Now, my next poem, my last poem of this, as I say, it might be considered a bit of fun, but it's much more than that. Because this poem just may be the first poetic experience that children have on love as a theme for poetry. And I think, because I know it myself, and I've used this many times in talking to actors and talking to people, as an example of what I mean about the romance of love and the idea of how a poem that might be considered nonsense, and that might be a clue to who the writer might be considered nonsense, is in fact so much more than that. It's about the experience of loving and the romance of loving and the journeys that one will take for the sake of loving. I think it's one of the best love poems ever written. And if you haven't guessed, it's called The Owl and the Pussycat. The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a £5 note. The owl looked up to the stars above and sang to a small guitar, "Oh, lovely pussy, oh, pussy, my love, what a beautiful pussy you are. You are, you are. What a beautiful pussy you are." Pussy said to the owl, "You elegant fowl, how charmingly sweetly you sing. Oh, let us be married. Too long we have tarried, but what shall we do for a ring?" They sailed away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows, and there, in a wood, a piggy-wig stood with a ring on the end of his nose. His nose, with a ring on the end of his nose. "Dear pig, are you willing to sell for 1 shilling your ring?" said the piggy. "I will." So they took it away and were married next day by the turkey who lives on the hill. They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon. And hand in hand, on the edge of the sand, they danced by the light of the moon. The moon, the moon. They danced by the light of the moon. Now, if anybody tells me that that isn't an exquisite love poem, you have no romance in your soul and don't deserve to be reading poetry. Anyway, that's this week. And that's a little tribute to Poetry Month in all its forms and shapes, from the poetry of John Donne and Shakespeare through that of Edward Lear, all the way to the modern poets that are wonderful guest readers. And I want to say thank you to each and every one of them. There were only 3, Nancy and Jalina, and to Alex. I want to say thank you for doing those readings for us. And we don't often look at poetry, but if you're interested in us covering any other poets or poetry in general or any other poetic themes, we can always find a webinar that can bring you more poetry. So let us know whether that would interest you, what kind of poets, what kind of poetry you'd like to hear. And we have plenty of artists who will be delighted to read poetry for you, as I will myself. So that is all. As I say, we're finishing slightly early this week. I want to thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that. Next week, thank you, David. Thank you. I want to, and Grace, thank you. I want to remind you all that coming up soon, Endgame, there we go. You can book your tickets now. The booking is open online. I know the opening night is pretty much booked out, but
only 20 seats left.
Only 20 seats left for the opening night. And remember, Endgame is limited seating and limited length of run. So if you could easily not get tickets. So please, please, please consider booking now. And we've also announced our following show, which will be Boys in the Band, which will be coming on in June. And so now is the time to start booking. Next week, I'm going to embark on a couple of weeks on a journey into Shakespeare's Other Richard play. And it is my personal favorite of all the history plays, and that is King Richard II. So we're going to take a look at that as a play, as a structure, and as Shakespeare's usual abuse of the facts of history by turning it into a play about human behavior rather than historical behavior. So that will be next week. We start on Richard II. I'm going to do a couple of weeks on that. Thank you again to the Allegheny Foundation for our sponsorship. And a reminder, please, please, from the bottom of my heart, if you can donate anything, please do it. We don't mind where the money comes from. You can donate in pounds sterling, in euros, in zlotys, in Australian dollars, in Canadian dollars. We don't mind. But please, please, please think about making a donation, no matter how small. And if you're feeling really generous, a small donation on a monthly basis would also be very, very good. All the information is there on the website. I will see you all next week talking about Richard II. In the meantime, Have a wonderful Easter weekend. I hope the weather stays fine wherever you are, and thanks for being here. Bye.